Hello and welcome to my music room in sunny Los Angeles. Today I'm going to talk about something very, very special indeed, which is this record. This is of French violin sonatas by Debussy, Roussel and Ravel, recorded in 1957 by the legendary French engineer André Charlin. And we have here two soloists who I had never even heard of. Michèle Auclair is a violinist, and Jacqueline Robin-Bonneau. Hope my French accent is doing okay. It's been a long time since I spoke French regularly. This is a very unique, special record. I first heard about it because I got an email. It was at the weekend. It was an email from my editor at Tracking Angle, Michael Framer, and he was doing a review of this, and he said, look, I'm going to send you a digital file I made of some of this record. I'd like you to listen to it. And he asked both me and the other classical music guy at Tracking Angle, well, one of the other classical music guys, we've got several now, to write a little something about our reactions to hearing the record and our comments on the music, etc. So I listened to the file. I was absolutely blown away. It felt like I was stepping back in time in all the best kind of ways. I don't know about you, but one of the reasons why I love to collect records is because especially the older records from the 50s, the 60s, even going into the 70s, they capture a style of music making, a sound of music making, which we're increasingly losing. I like to refer to the corporatization, the internationalization of music. You can really hear it in orchestras. Orchestras are all just starting to sound the same. There was a time when, a Russian orchestra sounded very different from a French orchestra or from an English orchestra or certainly from an American orchestra. But as, you had the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union, as you had more and more recording, everything started to sound the same. But this record comes from a period in time where things did not sound the same. And you have a violinist here, Michèle Auclair, who I'd never heard of, rapidly discovered that she is held in very, very high esteem. Her playing is considered to be something of a blend of what one call a French approach and a Russian approach. In other words, that she has all the formidable virtuosity and power of the Russian school, but then she has this other certain, forgive me, je ne sais quoi, that we associate with French musicians. And the music just leapt out of the speakers here. The pianist, who again I'd not heard of, Jacqueline Robin-Bonneau, again was considered a very fine accompanist of the period. She worked with the top musicians. She accompanied Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, the great soprano, frequently. An amazing career. So why is this record so special? Why is it so unique? I was trying to figure out an approach to talk about this, and this is really what I settled on, that there is something very unique about this record, and it relates to both the music, the time it was recorded, how it was recorded, and how this reissue has been done. And this reissue has been done with such love and care and attention to detail. We're in a whole other world from even the finest of the audiophile reissue labels like, Analog Productions, etc. This is taking it to another level, and yes, this is an expensive record. You have to think about it more as a unique artifact. I believe there are only going to be 150 of these pressed. I did not get it for free. I did pay something. I did not pay the full price, thank goodness. But I did pay more than I would pay for a UHQR, for example. I will just say right up front, if you are an audiophile, if you have the money, if you like classical music, you don't even need to think twice. You need to buy this record. Don't even need to listen to it, sight unseen. It is a really exquisite piece, both in terms of the music you're going to hear from the grooves, and just as a physical item. You cannot really see this here, but the cover, it's all been done with such attention to period detail. There is real gold here. The printing, the nature of the paper, it's all been done by the finest artisans. Before I get into some details about the reissue, let me just tell you a little bit about the musicians. Michèle Auclair, highly revered by David Oistrakh, the great Russian violinist, and in fact on the notes on the back, which are written by Jean-Marc Harari, who is the owner of French record company, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. He's written a wonderful program note in French. I just put this into Google Translate and I got a really nice translation. And he's written an excellent essay telling us all about these musicians in far more detail than I'm going to go into here. But one of the key things to say here is that at a certain point, Michèle Auclair became disillusioned with the concert life, and who could blame her, and she became more of a teacher, etc. Now, these recordings were made in 1957, and they were going to be for this label Discophile Française, and this was one of the great labels of the period. And if you go online and you look up Discophile Française, you see some of the amazing artists, French artists they recorded, and you will also see commensurately enormous prices for decent copies, if you can even find them. Her records are very rare, very hard to find. Now, this particular program is very interesting, and Jean-Marc tells the story in his notes and on his website, and I will provide a link to the website, and there's much more background information there. All of it is quite fascinating. He actually met Michèle Auclair and had a conversation with her, and she was very reticent to talk about her work and want to talk more about him and his love of music, etc. And this is an important point to make. I think one of the reasons why this is so fine and so special is that Jean-Marc Harari is not only a perfectionist, but he loves the music. He's really coming at this from the viewpoint of a musician, but also as something of a musicologist, someone who wants to bring the past to life in a way that is really vivid and does it full justice. And he does it with a vengeance with this record. So he had conversations with her. He had conversations with Jacqueline, who is an amazing pianist. You won't believe the playing on this record. He knew that they had issued this record of just the Debussy Violin Sonata and the Ravel Sonatas, and it had come out in mono. But this was right around the time that Discophile Française ceased to exist, and it became a very rare item. Now, a few years ago, interestingly, it was reissued in a purist audiophile edition by the Electric recording company. This is the company out of England that does these purist audiophile editions, again in very limited numbers. The pressings tend to be done flat. It's done from an all-tube mastering system. When I say flat, no extra EQ or anything. Beautiful presentation. I've never actually heard one of these. They're very expensive. They tend to sell out almost immediately. Obviously, you could think in terms of the French record company, which is Jean-Marc Harari's company. There's been one release prior to this, which I'll be talking about in a moment. You could think of this as being kind of in the same vein, But it really isn't. It's a handcrafted care and attention to every detail taken, trying to create a one-of-a-kind collector's piece, which it absolutely is. This is just one of the most extraordinary records in my collection, and I have a lot of really extraordinary records, including, you know, amazing records back from the 50s and 60s, which I would never want to part with. But this is something really special and different. Anyway, in his conversations with these two artists, he started to realize that there may be stereotypes. And they talked about the Roussel Sonata, which they had recorded in the same sessions. And then he was able to track down the actual stereotypes. And that is what is on here. And that's what makes this so incredibly special. Just to focus on the music for a moment, you know, in this period of time, we're moving from the 19th into the 20th century. And you have an absolutely fascinating snapshot here of what's going on in French music. You have and it's in chronological order. You start with the Debussy Violin Sonata, which was composed in 1917. So we've already got Debussy moving into a more modernist idiom, breaking away from the influence of Wagner. Debussy was very influenced by Wagner and then turned on that. And then you obviously have the pivotal piece of the Prelude in the Afternoon of a Faun. So you're getting one sense of moving into 20th century music in the Debussy Violin Sonata. Then what's fascinating is you get the Roussel Sonata, not so well known, but increasingly being more performed and becoming more audiences becoming aware of this piece. Now, this is composed in 1924. What's fascinating about this piece is it's more obviously a throwback to the more traditional romantic way of doing things, a more old-fashioned tradition. And yet, it also is tinged with these aspects of modernism. So then you've got that as a contrast with the Ravel, with the Debussy. And then finally on side 2, we have the Ravel Violin Sonata, composed between 23 and 27. Indubitably Ravel, and it's another kind of modernism. You're hearing echoes of Debussy, you're hearing echoes of everything else that's going on in modern music, but it's Ravel. It's got that neoclassical quality, it's got that ultra refined quality that's so distinctive to him. And I have to say that the Ravel recording here just has one of those moments when the second movement begins and it's pizzicato in the violin. I mean, I really felt like they were in the room. It was absolutely extraordinary. I mean, just right there. Interestingly, the recording, I believe, was spread out over a couple of days. The balance is very slightly different in the opening Debussy sonata. I felt that it slightly favored the piano, and the piano had a slightly different sound than it does have in Roussel and Ravel. So clearly the engineer-producer Charlin did some adjustments. It's not a problem in the Debussy at all. It's just a slightly different balance. You can hear everything the violin is doing. It's very interesting, the piano sound. It's not the kind of piano sound you associate in modern recordings. The piano sound is much rounder, mellower. I actually initially thought that maybe this was a French piano, like an Erard, for example, which had a slightly softer kind of tone. But Jean-Marc told me, no, he's pretty sure it's a Steinway, but my God, it's so different to the kind of Steinways you would hear now. It's a much mellower, softer sound. I really like it. It's a beautiful sound. And she plays the piano so beautifully. And I was immediately reminded of this wonderful French pianist called Marcel Meyer, which brings me back to the French recording company's first release, which was of these unreleased recordings at the time of Marcel Meyer doing in mono the 2 books of Debussy preludes. And I love these recordings. I only have them there was a box set done by EMI. She's one of my favorite pianists, and she did these glorious recordings of Bach, and then the French Baroque composers like Rameau, Couperin, and then she did Debussy and Ravel, and these are some of my absolute favorite piano recordings ever, but they're just in mono. He did a deluxe 2 LP set recreating all the original style of the discophile français. Even though these recordings were never released at the time, he did it as if they had been released, and I'm saving up my pennies to buy that set because I have to have it because it's Marcel Meyer and they're lovely recordings, and to have this on vinyl. And I will put a link below because my colleague Michael Johnson did a really great review discussion of that particular release, and so you can go check out what he had to say about that. So turning to this, when I started listening to the piano playing, I was immediately reminded of Marcel Meyer. The sound on this, it's so interesting. I immediately felt like I was not in a studio, that I had walked into one of those quintessential living rooms in a Parisian apartment or house, and I've been in those places because I had friends and relatives in France growing up, and my wife's family. So I've been in those kinds of places, and I felt I was sitting in one of those kinds of rooms, slightly higher ceilings, and I was just sitting listening to musicians playing in the room. It had a wonderfully intimate, convivial, social feeling to it. It did not feel like I was in a studio at all. There was a friendliness to the sound. There was just this feeling that I was at a gathering of friends listening to these 2 wonderful musicians. There's something in the sound that takes me away from the studio. I've still got all the precision of the studio, but it just has that quality of something very, very real. And I feel like I'm in 1957 in all the best kind of ways. I feel like I'm hearing the way this music would have been played by French musicians at that time, and it is so special. Is there a vintage sound to the recording? In some ways, yes, but in other ways, there's such a purity to it. It's all analog. And I'll come on to some of those details in a moment, the way it was recorded and mastered and cut and all of that. So that there is that tactile sense to the recording. Yes, it's vintage. You are hearing the microphones and the tube equipment of the time, but you do not need to make any allowances. And in some ways, there is a warmth to it, there is a tonality to it, which you simply do not hear in modern recordings. You will hear great modern recordings, but there is something more objective about the sound. And this is also allied to just the way instruments sound now. I mean, you very rarely hear pianos sound like this. You certainly don't hear a Steinway sound like this. For example, I was talking in another video about the Grieg lyric pieces, and I was talking about other recordings I love, and I forgot to mention this recording by Leif Ove Ansnes of the Grieg lyric pieces, which he recorded actually on Grieg's own piano in his home. And what's wonderful about that set of recordings is you actually are hearing Grieg's piano, and it sounds very, very different. Well, here it's again this thing of you've traveled back in time, but you're getting everything as vividly as if you were here, but there is still also that sense of being back in time. And it's, for me, it's absolutely irresistible. And then you combine it with the utter perfection of this pressing. nary a click, a pop, nothing, no distortion, nothing. And I know that Jean-Marc worked very hard with his mastering engineer, going over it many times to make sure that it was absolutely pristine, that there was no sense of distortion anywhere, nothing. And like I say, this thing just leaps out at you, being very vivid. I'm going to give you some technical details here, and I'm going to read directly from the website because I really don't want to get this wrong. The mastering was done by Carl Rawati, and the cutting system used was as follows. A specific Studer A80 pre-listen tape machine with 2 heads, specially designed to provide the necessary analog tape delay required for the lathe's computer to adjust the groove spacing and depth without converting to digital and back to analog to achieve the required delay. The whole process remains 100% pure analog. To the Neumann SP77 console and the Neumann SAL 74B cutting amps, an extremely rare vintage Fairchild 670 vacuum tube compressor from 1957 has been added, as has an equally rare Pultec EMH7 vacuum tube equalizer. There are only 3 other existing copies in the world. Let's just talk about the sleeve. The printing of the sleeve has been produced on 2 different old Heidelberg printing presses. The color side of the sleeve was printed in deluxe 4-color process quadrichromy. Films were made separately for each of the 3 primary colors, which were then superimposed to obtain the final result. A magnesium letterpress plate was used for the luxurious printing of the text on the back. I can just tell you that to hold this in your hands is really special. It just feels like a work of art. Here is the cover again. And the back. Here is the record with its label. Like I said, the pressing is immaculate. It's so vivid, it's so real. I cannot say enough about this record, and it is unique. I know there are 150 copies, which is more than one, but it's not that many. There is a price to pay for this perfection. This is the approach that Jean-Marc has taken. Like I said, this is gorgeous music, beautifully played in an authentic and thrilling manner that just leaps across the years. What a joy to discover these 2 new musicians to me. I actually have subsequently tracked down a couple of other of Michèle Auclair's records. There really aren't very many out there, but I did track down what's one of them? The Mozart violin concertos. She's a beautiful player. She is revered by collectors. You know, there are these other famous violinists who are highly revered, like Joanna Marzi, and their records are real collector's items. But I think this deserves to be right up there with the very best. I cannot tell you how wonderful this record is. The other evening I listened to it again, right through in one go. I mean, there is that moment in the Ravel with the pizzicato where you feel that she's just standing right there. It's so vivid. This wonderful combination of feeling like they're in the room and that you've also traveled back in time. I mean, how often do you get that feeling from a record? This is very, very special indeed. The only way you can buy it is directly from the website, and I will put a link to that. Go to the website, read about all the extra information on the record. If you're a collector, if you love classical music, spend the money. This is a very special record indeed. It will give you hours of pleasure, and it's just such a beautiful item to hold in your hands like this. What makes a record unique? Maybe I've covered some elements of that. All I know is this is one of those records. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy listening and good night.